When you first launch Rebelle 5, you're going to get this screen here unless you've turned it off to where it says don't show on startup. I personally leave it on because I like coming here and choosing my canvas and everything else. So when I'm recording, I tend to work at 8 by 10 or 10 by 8, so vertical or horizontal. And then I use nanopixel because I have Rebelle 5 Pro to upsize it to what I want to print at, which is usually 16 by 20 at 300 dpi, and upsizing it 4 times to what it is does just fine through the nanopixel export. So this is where I usually work because the recording software tends to not have any issues with this. So mine is going to be here. You can change the size by simply clicking here and working in inches. You can change that over here to pixels. So if you want to have it at pixels, you can, or centimeters, or inch. I'm in the US, so I just put it on inches because, we don't want to be that precise. So over here you have your DPI list. This stands for dots per inch. That's how many dots of ink will be printed within 1 inch. The higher the DPI, the more clear it's going to print. Okay. You can kind of cheat with this with the nanopixel export like I was just mentioning, but if you're going to be working in just stuff for computer watch, look stuff, you're not going to be printing anything, you can stay in the 72 to 96 to 100 range right here. If you're going to be printing anything, I would go at least 150 all the way up to 300. You can go 400, 600, but honestly, I don't find a need to. I've never found a need to. So I tend to stick with 150. And over here, you'll have some default settings for different print suggestions and that sizes. So like if you're aware, A4 is your common size, 8 by 10 is kind of almost A4. And so if you want to, go that size, you can see, it's pretty close. It's not exact. 29.7, 21, so 24.5, 20. So it's close. Close enough. So this is where you would go in and set all of your beginner stuff for getting started. If you click right here, you can select your different papers and go with that, and then the different colors. I'm just going to put this on the aquarelle like it is right now, and then I'll leave it at the default white. If it has this icon here, it means that it has deckled edges, which will mean that it'll look like it's torn edges here. That can look really neat and really cool. But I'm leaving it off right now because most of my prints I just print with clean edges, and don't worry about that. So this is what it would look like. If you want to go in here and change the color, you can just click on right here, select whatever color you want, and then go from there. Like I said, I'm leaving this white. I'm going with the aquarelle, and I'm going to say OK, and then I'm going to say OK here in just a second. This is for recording time lapse. If you want to set up the settings for it, if you want to record it while you're painting and then have a playback video that you could use, you can do that. So I'm just going to click OK. That's going to set up my canvas for what size I want, and then I'm ready to paint. So if you've never painted with Rebelle 4, let me give you a quick tour, kind of show you around. You can set up your tools any way you want. You can actually, if they're not set up the way you want, you can just drag it out or put it back in however you want. If you don't see one that you want, you just click on window and it'll be listed right here. So say for example I wanted my mixing palette, then I would click on that and show it here. When I was done with it, I would just close it. Okay, so any of these that you don't have showing and you want to be showing, then all you have to do is go up window and then dock it where you want. Okay. Now, if you're painting and you don't want to have this here, you just press tab and it goes away. Okay. So that way you have a clean area to work in. And this is how I set mine up. So I have the basic tools up here. I have my stencils here because I use stencils a lot to save me some time and to get textures that I want. I have the properties for the brushes here because when I select a brush, you'll see that this changes to the properties of that specific brush. Okay, so I can play around with the oiliness of it. I can play around with some of the different ones, with their opacity. Like for example, with some of the ones that are water-based media, I can play around with how much water they have in them, and that's going to make it react differently on here. So like if it's very low water, it'll just kind of go on there and stay. If it has high water, it'll go on there and build up the water, and then the water can run or spread just like it does in traditional. But that's how these are laid out here. For me, do whatever is comfortable for you. For me, this is a comfortable layout, having this here and then having all my other stuff over here. So this is where I keep all my tools, stencils, properties, and so forth. Over here is how I have it set up with the layers panel here, my color palette here, and then the large one here. This is kind of redundant, but I like being able to see all my different ones if I want to switch to a different palette quickly. And then being able to have it up here so I can select from it quickly. So this is Tilt and Navigator if you have them selected. So Navigator is just going to give you a kind of a thumbnail version of it if it's zoomed out, but I don't tend to use it, and I'll explain why here in a second. Tilt right here, if you turn this on, then it's going to affect, basically it's tilting your canvas. So whatever direction this is facing, the water or any wet media is going to run towards that. So this becomes the top edge, and then I'm tilting towards the other way. So like if I'm doing this, that means this edge is the top, this edge is the bottom. Everything will run that direction to the left. All right, so if I just have it with no tilt, so the tilt is off basically, then it will just spread out from wherever I put it, okay? So that's where I have this here. And now the reason I don't use the navigator is because one of the windows that I have open right here says preview, and I keep that on another monitor right here. And so everything that I paint on here will then show on this one. So for example, let me grab this and see, so I can see it. So then what I can do is I can have it on a different monitor where it's zoomed out a little bit. I can see a little bit more what it looks like in the overall picture of things, but plus I also have it laid out on my other monitor that gives me a much closer understanding of what it's going to look like printed. Okay, so that's how I do that part, and that's why I don't use the navigator. Actually, I don't even know why I keep it up there other than just by default it's there, because I don't obviously need it. So here, let me just get rid of it. So there we go. So that gives me these layouts here for it. Now I keep my layers panel here, so that way I can go through it. And then there's actually my color palette. One of my other color settings is down here as well. The color panel, which is, again, I can put it up here. It's kind of redundant. I don't tend to use it too much, so I'll just close it. To be honest, I forgot it was down there. So now I've got this. I can do all my layers here. And that's kind of the basic layout. Go with whatever, again, is comfortable for you and what you want to go with. But this is kind of the main structure and how I suggest doing it to give you a little bit more freedom. You can also scroll them in and out by clicking on it and dragging it. Like I said, you can undock them and move them around if you want to and so forth. But I like this. It works pretty well. The mouse wheel, if you scroll back and forth on the mouse wheel, it will zoom in and out, so you can zoom way in. If you get in there and you decide, hey, I want to pop back out real quick, you just hit the period button, and that pops you back out to a full screen mode. If you hit 0, that brings you up to 100%. Okay, so that gives you an idea of how all this is laid out. So let's talk about some of the basic tools. Now the brush is up here. You know, you've got your oil brush, oil and acrylics. You've got your express oils, which basically oils and acrylics are your thick paints. Your express oils are more of your, not so much thinner, but smoother paints. They don't require as much computation from the system. So you can use these for quicker painting and so forth if you want to. And this is your watercolor brush, your inking brush, your pencils, your charcoals, your marker, and your airbrush. So that is where all these live. This is your blending tool. Okay, so if I'm wanting to blend, I can use that. This is my smudge tool, so that I can smudge around, cloning, erasing, fill, color select, crop, move tool, and transform. Selection tool, which is one of the ones I use a lot. The blow tool, which manipulates paints that have a watery texture to them, and that can be moved around with by blowing them, just like you would on acrylic or anything like that. Drying tool, this is kind of a sponge kind of thing that where it just, you tap it and it takes water back off. And then this is the water tool right here where you can add water to your canvas. When you click that, it turns on this little icon right here, and anywhere there is water, it will turn blue while this is activated. These buttons over here are for controlling your pausing the diffusion. These are for selecting what you want to do with the layer, if you want to wet it, if you want to wet all visible, if you want to dry the layer, and then if you want to quick dry, fast dry, basically it leaves the paper damp, but not really wet, not like sopping wet. It just leaves it damp so you can still move stuff around. You have over here your brushes. All the brushes tend to have these settings here, which are, if you press 1 on your keyboard, it'll go to this paint brush version here. 2 will go to paint and mix. 3 will go to paint and blend. 4 goes to blend, and 5 goes to erase. And you can switch between these quickly by just tapping the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 buttons and moving around. I use those quite a bit. So that gives you the super fast overview of all the tools. If you want more information about those, Escape Motions has some really nice short stuff that they show on their channel. You can also go up here to Help and click F1. That will launch a help PDF for you that you can then see and take a look at. For me personally, that launches it over into Google Chrome, and then I can see the Rebelle 5 full help manual here. So whatever you have set as your default PDF reader is what will launch out for that. Okay. But that's a great place to go look up something real quick if you don't remember or you're trying to figure it out. The other thing is you can always go to community and go to forum and join the forum there and be able to ask questions and stuff. That's the login there is basically wherever you got your license key to log in from. But there's all sorts of stuff here like video tutorials, intro tutorials, Rebelle's website. These all take you over to Escape Motions. Okay, so that way you can see a lot of these things here. But I wanted to show real quick my setup and how I do it and how I get it laid out. So when I'm working on a piece, once I've got it here, and well, before I go into that, the main thing that I want you to take away from what I was just telling you is just go in here and play around. That is the best way to find out what these things do and how to do them. And it's just take 30 minutes and go through the different tools, smear them around, move them around, and get familiar with how they react. Okay. The other really good thing I want to recommend you don't do is don't worry about it. Don't overly sweat all the details about it. If you've got my brush sets and you've got my stencil sets, then that's going to eliminate a lot of the hassle for doing stuff anyway. So feel free to use those. But the main thing is get in here and play around with it. You can download different palettes and different brushes from Escape Motion's website as well. But the main thing is feel free to just mess around in here. Now, the only other thing I will tell you that I forgot to mention real quick is you have this pigment here. If you have Rebelle 5 Pro, you can turn that on, and that makes the paint react in a much more realistic and traditional mixing for when the paints mix with each other. And then, like I mentioned a couple times, you have the nanopixel export. So when you export it, you can export it up to 400% of what it is. So for example, if I was exporting this, that is 40 by 32 inches at 150 DPI, which I can easily shrink back down onto a 16 by 20 canvas for printing. And it gives me perfectly clear, crisp prints every time. So that's what I tend to do. Okay, so let's say that I'm painting something and I want to come in and get it laid out. What I will usually do, and you'll see this in a lot of my videos, is I'll select one of these tools, like maybe the pencil tool or one of the oil brushes to work with and get started with. I'll usually sketch out some quick kind of map for what I want, kind of the composition, taking a look at it. A lot of times I'm working from photographs that I have licensed and using those to go through everything and being able to have some references. Some of them are also photographs that I've taken as well, and of different areas, and using those as my reference. But I do try to use references. If you want to have a reference here that you can look at, one of the windows right here is reference images. When you load that in there, you can just click right here to load a reference image. It'll pop in here. You click on it. It gives you another little window here, which I usually drag off of this area to my other monitor, which is next to my preview screen. And then I use that. You can also come up here and use lay it out on here to where you can be able to, set it as another layer and that kind of stuff. But anyway, so that's where references image is. Then mixing palette. Mixing palette I don't tend to use. It is a really good feature. Personally, though, I just don't use it. I tend to use and mix on my canvas. So that way I can just quickly mix up something that I like and use that. So, yeah. So anyway, so let's say that I came in here and I wanted to draw something out. Then, again, I can take and just kind of sketch in, like if I was doing a landscape. Maybe I'm like, okay, I want to have some rolling hills, maybe some clouds, and I want to have just kind of a path that kind of comes across, maybe some trees, maybe a couple more, and I just get it kind of laid out quickly, maybe some bushes and some grass and stuff like that. So this is really just kind of shorthand for what I want to go with, okay, and how I'm looking at it. And so I lay this out and can get kind of a feel for it, and then start playing around with what I want to put in here and doing it. So that's kind of how I get started with everything. So it's not a bad way to start. Then I've got that on a layer. I just change the layer by double clicking on it, and I can change the name of the layer like so. And then just like, for example, if I wanted to name this line art, I can just do that. And then I can keep it to where I want to mess around with it and go from there. So I'm going to do Control A, and I'm going to hit the delete key and Control D. So let's look at some of those hotkeys. I use hotkeys a lot for different things. So you have Control A, which selects everything, Control D, which deselects everything. Then you have Control Alt V, which selects all visible. If you do Control C, you'll copy it. Control X will cut everything. Control V pastes whatever you copied or cut. Control Z undoes, and Control Shift Z redoes. So those are some of probably the most used hotkeys are right there. Okay. Some of these other ones that you have here were like new layer, remove layer and all that kind of stuff. You can use them. I don't tend to mess around with them too much, especially while I'm kind of going through everything. As you can see here, here's the zoom out. So you can use the plus key, the minus key, the 0, and the period as well there. You can also switch over to grayscale by hitting G and switching back and forth. And that'll let you kind of look at some of your values to see what they're at. And then, of course, all these have hotkeys as well. Okay. So like I said, I tend to use those a lot with it and kind of going over it. I try to recommend working on using the pigment layer. Now, when you use the pigment layer, you cannot use the layer blending modes. Okay. And there's really only two that I think you need to worry about, especially at first. So I'm going to go to the selection tool, which brings up the properties down here. I'm going to select a circle. I'm just going to drag it out. Now, if I'm dragging it out like this and it's not round, I can just push Shift and it'll make it perfectly round. Once I've got it where I want it, I hit Enter and I've got it selected. So I'm going to push L and go to my fill bucket right there. See? And I'm going to just grab, let's go down here to this palette here, and I'll just grab kind of this color there and fill it. Now I can fill it just like this. I can also tell it to wet the layer if I want. That means this would become wet. This would still be dry paper around it. So I've got that selected. So what I wanted to show you was there's really only two of these in the blending options that I think you need to worry about. And these are really more for kind of punching stuff up and blending it together towards the end. But let's make two layers real quick. This one right here, layer 1, we're going to go in here and set it to multiply. So that's going to become my shadow layer. We're going to set layer 2 to overlay. That's going to become my highlight layer. So taking just the airbrush, for example, and pushing the right bracket key, I can increase the size, and I can go over here to layer 1 and just come around with that same color. It's going to give me a shadow color. Okay. If I go to a lighter color, like say this one, and then I come back up to layer 2, I can hit this right here, and I've got a lighter color. So it's really great for blending in some highlights here and there, or if you're trying to get a kind of a glow with something or a shadow, it gives you a really good effect. So I'm going to do Control A, and I'm going to do delete. I'm going to select the layer below it. I'm going to do delete. Select the layer below it. I'm going to do delete. Clear all that off. And then Control D to deselect. But let's say, for example, I was doing a fire or something like that. Like if I wanted to do, you know, a candle or you know, campfire or something. So I can go back to my oils and I can grab this. So let me grab the Express oils. It doesn't really matter what I've got here. So I can just throw this in here. Now I also like to tend to use the selection tool. And this one adds to your selection. So like if I select something and then I want to select a little bit more, I can do so. Of course it helps if I actually... So I can kind of go around and get it selected. And then I could take something like the fill tool and fill it in like so. And I've got that in there. And then if I wanted to take the yellow, and let's again go back to the here, I'm just going to select, this is one of the default ones. So I'm just going to take this and quickly throw in. So that is on 2. If I put it on 4, I can go in here and kind of soften this, expand it, and this keeps the properties of my brush with letting me blend it. So it's almost like taking a clean brush, like your brush if you clean the oil off of it, and we're just, you know, going back in and blending, versus taking the blending tool. The blending tool can give you a softer kind of thing. Okay, so, but anyway, so I wanted to show you this here. So like if I go to this layer, and let's just kind of come back to this orange, and then I'm back on 2. All I got to do is just kind of come in here and add that, and then go back to 4. Blend it in a little bit here and there. And let me change my canvas color to a darker color so this shows up more. Alright, so I've got a darker color there, and I come up to the blend, this yellow, and I can create a really light spot there. 4, soften it a little bit, come into the white, and really kind of get some glow going on. And then I've got this really nice buildup of fire, and I can, you know, switch to another brush and add a little bit of more glow to it if I want. I can come down here, make a layer, grab the layer, drag it below it, hit it with a little bit of the yellow. So I've got kind of a nice glow from it. And then I can come back up here, hit my brush, hit 4, and just really kind of blend this around a little bit. I can start getting some nice soft blending. So that's how you can use these to really start messing around with them. When you've got it how you like it, you just kind of take and select all of it. And if you only select portions of it, it's going to mess with the blending. But if you select all of it, it'll kind of bring them together. It will occasionally, like this did, it'll kind of mess with the overall blending layers. So I usually just leave them and export my finished product. Okay. But this is how you can, get a feel for it. And again, do exactly what I'm doing. Go in here and play around. I mean, I'm not trying to make a finished painting here by any means. I'm just playing around for, like, if I wanted to have a campfire or something. Okay. So that's what you want to do. You want to just kind of go in, play around, and get a feel for it. But, so those are the only two ones that you would need. Multiply for shadows, overlay for highlights. Okay. But if you turn on real pigment, you can't use those. All right. So what I usually do is I do my painting, then I make 2 layers on top. So I do my whole painting with the pigments turned on, so I get the really natural looking blend. Then I do my 2 layers on top of it all with multiply and overlay, and go in and just selectively add shadows and add highlights, and get a feel for it. So that is what I would recommend doing for playing around with everything, and hopefully this gives you an idea of where to find tools, how to find them, how to get your stuff set up, what to look for. I want this video, really more than any of the others, to be a spot where people can leave questions. Any questions you leave here, I will use to make another quick tips video. This one's a little longer because I had a lot more to explain, but I like to make some quick tip videos for you guys to really explain all, everything else. So like if you have a specific question, put it in the comments below, tag me in it, and then I will make a video and respond to it, so that way it can give you some help there. There's a ton more information over on my Patreon account if you haven't joined. If you're not a subscriber on YouTube, make sure to do that, and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and all the other interwebs type stuff. I hope this helped. I hope this gives you a place to start, and I look forward to seeing whatever you create. Thanks so much.